listening to Give God 90, where we're not afraid of the tough biblical questions, because we will dig through the language, the culture, and the history to find the truth revealed in the words of our Creator.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being with us this evening. I apologize for the little bit of a rumble in the background. If you can hear that, I can hear it. It's warm, and the air conditioner is running, so we do hope that doesn't bother you too much. A lot of people began celebrating Passover last evening, and that's not a terribly bad thing. Some folks that follow a different calendar, it will be a different day for them. That's okay too. Of course, with Passover comes the Feast of Crumbs, unleavened bread. And I want to...
You're referring to the crumbly matzah, right?
Yes, I am. And I want to, right off the get-go, say something that I have to say, I think, every year, and that is, no, you don't have to eat just matzah for a whole week, okay? You get to eat other things, too. You can have your lamb, you can have your chicken, you can have matzo ball soup, you can have rice, you can have all kinds of things, as long as it doesn't contain leaven. So, it's not like, oh, all I get to eat is matzah. No, there's a lot of things out there. And since we have ours, I guess I can say this. There's a company that makes a really good gluten-free matzah. In fact, we use it year-round for crackers. It's that good. So it's hard to find, but it's out there. It comes in a blue and white box. So it's there and it's available. If you haven't been to Give God 90 for a while, check that out. Don't forget the books are available. I've got some folks that tell me it's, that Inheriting Lies is one of the best books they've ever read. So, that coming from, I didn't give that book to them. They bought it themselves. In fact, they bought two. Usually I say, read one, give one to your pastor. But husband and wife both have their own. They're going through it at their own pace. That way they don't have to fight over it. Mm-hmm. It's always a good thing too, right?
Yes.
So that's all out there. Because this is the beginning of Passover, I wanted to do something in a way, maybe answer some questions, maybe, or hopefully bring up some more that you're going to go look up, right? That's how you learn. You go, you hear something, and then you go yourself and you seek out the answers. One of the questions asked at a typical Seder meal, and the Seder's a tradition, okay, is what makes this night different? What's happening, at this evening that is unlike any other night? And to start the answer to that is like, why do we observe Passover? We actually can't keep it the way it was designated to be kept. And that's kind of a bad way to say that too, because the word there is actually to guard it. We're to guard it. So we observe it. We celebrate it. In Genesis 12:3, it says, I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee, in you, Abraham, shall all families of the earth be blessed. One of the reasons we observe it is to remember what happened to the children of Abraham. What happens when, they eventually wind up in Egypt, thanks to Joseph? And what happens when they come out? Because there was more than just the children of Abraham that came out of Egypt. A lot of people don't realize that. It was a mixed multitude. They represent every ethnic group, every, I guess you could say nation today on earth. Everybody was represented that came out of Egypt. There's a way of telling a story, in books and in TV, in movies, and it's called a flashback. And it's where you begin in the middle or near the end of the story, and you flash back to the beginning to show how the characters got to where they are. And I'm going to do something similar with this Passover message, because when we simply go through the lesson the same way, it kind of gets boring. Those boring old facts. So you look at it in various ways because you don't want to miss any important details. So I'm going to begin with Exodus 5, where Moses had spoken to Pharaoh, who instead of letting the people go is now ordered that they make the same amount of bricks, but they have to gather their own straw. And in Exodus 6, Moses asked Jehovah, "Why are you making this so hard? Pharaoh hates me, and now the Hebrew people hate me too. I can't win. And by the way, God, I don't know if you're really helping." That, I paraphrased that, of course, but that was basically Moses' frustration. The Hebrew people were beginning to reject Moses. Now, these are the same people who welcomed Moses when he returned. But they're now wishing that he had just stayed gone because we were better off without you. Oh, my. Were they? Let's find out. We're going to flash forward a little bit to another point in the lesson where the people, even after they left, wanted to go back because they actually began to believe that they were better off before. So go ahead and read that passage.
The Israelites saw the king and his army coming after them. They were very frightened and cried to the Lord for help. They said to Moses, "What have you done to us? Why did you bring us out of Egypt to die in the desert? There were plenty of graves for us in Egypt. We told you in Egypt, 'Let us alone. Let us stay and serve the Egyptians.' Now we will die in the desert." Exodus chapter 14, 10 through 12.
The question should be, what was so great about Egypt? After everything they had seen the Almighty do, they were still convinced it was better before. To read some of these passages, you might think, this is going to sound terrible, but it's the truth. If you read through some of these passages, it reads like the Hebrew people were nothing but a bunch of crybabies, right? "Oh, Moses, we got to go back. Oh, this is terrible. You brought us out here to die." But that's really not an accurate portrayal of who they were. What image of the Hebrews do you have in mind when you think about them as slaves in Egypt? What kind of clothes did they wear? What kind of house did they live in? What was it about Moses interfering and making them work harder and longer hours to get the same results? It made their suffering was much better before. These are the questions to keep in mind as we flash back to Moses tending the flocks in Midian. Now, today, it's a desert. It's changing rapidly. Know some folks that just got back from there. They drove out on dirt roads and drove back into town on paved roads. That's how fast things are changing there. In the land of Midian, by the way. I'm not talking about the fake Mount Sinai and St. Catherine's Cathedral, by the way. I'm talking about in the land of Midian. When Moses was there, some 3,500 years ago or so, it would have been a lush landscape. I've talked to people from that area who tell me, think of it as a Serengeti. Lush grass. Very sparse rain, but very lush grass. only a foolish shepherd would take a flock where there's no food, right? Think about that. You're getting paid, or you're making money, you're making your livelihood, you're keeping your family alive by how well these animals gain weight and grow. You're not going to take them where they can't eat. I have heard so many people, so many pastors talk about, oh, it was out in the desert. Oh, it was this. It was dry. It was harsh. There wasn't any water. Yeah, there was. There just, wasn't water fit for people to drink. Okay? You got to think about these things in realistic terms. This isn't, you're not landing on Mars. They went from Egypt to Saudi Arabia. Moses looks up, sees a burning bush. Hopefully you know the story. Jehovah sends him back to Egypt. When he gets there, it's like, oh, Moses, welcome home. We're so glad to see you. Why'd you come back? And then something happens. And I'm here to lead you out of Egypt. Oh, that's wonderful, Moses. Oh, it's great. I'm glad you're here. When are we going? Let me talk to Pharaoh. He goes to Pharaoh. Let my people go. Of course, the answer is no. After some back and forth, I'm running through this story because there's something I want to get to. But after some back and forth, here come the plagues. Not like here come the judge, the old 70s line. But here come the plagues. And one by one, every god that the Egyptians bowed down to was defeated by the Almighty. Beginning with Hapi or Hapti, depending on which you read. It was the god of the Nile. Aaron touched the river and turned it to blood. The fish died. The river smelled terrible. And Hapi was defeated. But Pharaoh's magicians were actually able to partially duplicate it. So Pharaoh wasn't very impressed. And the Almighty hardened Pharaoh's heart. And when we say hardened his heart, it basically means it made him grumble. It didn't set well. It was it was more than an aggravation. Not like a loose button on your shirt, but it got under his skin. Then, of course, there was Hecate, the goddess of fertility, who had, by the way, the head of a frog. And to display senseless worship, Moses told Pharaoh the land would be stricken with frogs. And it was countless frogs. They were everywhere. When the magicians tried to do something about it, I guess what we could call them would be prophets in Pharaoh's court, it only brought more frogs. It made it worse. And only Moses was able to put the frogs back into the river. Next, of course, was Geb, the god of the earth. And while lice was already a problem in Egypt, they were able to control them until Moses and Aaron touched the earth with his rod. The dust of the earth became lice all over Egypt. Doesn't sound very fun, does it? Now, you have to remember that the first 3 plagues also affected the children of Abraham, everybody living in the land of Goshen. The rest did not. And of course, the next one would have been Capri, the Egyptian god of creation, the movement of the sun and the earth rebirthed. Moses meets Pharaoh in the morning and relays again the message, "Let my people go." Pharaoh said, "No." And flies began to swarm and infest Egypt. Hathor, the goddess of love and protection, has the head of the cow. And this meeting with Pharaoh ends with Moses speaking that the hand of God would be on all of the livestock in Egypt, and all of the cattle belonging to the Egyptians died. But the cattle that belonged to the Israelites did not. Isis would be next, the goddess of medicine and peace. This time Moses just takes a handful of ash and throws it in the air. And for the first time, Egyptians themselves are directly affected with boils and sores. Nut, the goddess of the sky. Moses warns Pharaoh. Pharaoh didn't listen. Hail destroys the flax and the barley. Then there was Seth, the god of the storms and disorder. Yep, locust was next. They destroyed everything with their voracious appetite. Ra, the sun god, complete darkness. Now, if you really want to know what complete darkness is, don't just go into a closet and close the door. You have to go somewhere where sunlight cannot penetrate. No light, no natural light can penetrate. If you've ever been in a cave, a lot of times, wherever you are, they'll turn the lights out. It's dark. You can't see your hand in front of your face. But it wasn't just that kind of a darkness. This was the kind of darkness that you felt on the inside, too. It was more than not just being able to see. You felt it. Each of those gods of wood and stone were defeated. And finally, the power of Egypt itself, Pharaoh, which represents man. This time there's a warning and an offering of safety for the average Egyptian caught in Pharaoh's self-destructive opposition to God. Death of the firstborn. Each one of those gods, including man, cannot stand when the Almighty Creator of the universe says he will fall. It's that simple. By the way, I want to mention Ron Wyatt's wife, Mary, has some interesting evidence in her book, Battle for the Firstborn. If you ever have a chance to read it, I suggest you do. The book connects some dots between King Tut as being the firstborn son of the Pharaoh at Moses' time, which would mean that Moses knew King Tut. That's kind of interesting. Wanted to go down that short rabbit trail just a little bit. But getting back to the question, why did the Hebrews cry out to God, but then when faced with leaving, they thought they had it better before? You know, what kind of clothes did they wear? Well, they weren't farmers. The work that they did was that of a factory worker. They made bricks. You know, we have images in our mind because of what Hollywood depicts. Right? Think about that. You know, talking to a friend the other night on the phone, he says, "Oh, I'm watching, what was it, the Ten Commandments?" Yeah. You know, the Cecil B. DeMille thing. Well, Charlton Heston, you know, plays a really good part. But I really don't think Moses looked like Charlton Heston. Just saying. What kind of houses did they live in? And, you know, don't think of Hebrew homes in Egypt as the slave shacks from what we've seen in the movies, you know, about the U.S. Civil War and the slaves that lived in those type of places. You know, the houses they lived in were homes that would have been built many years before they were slaves, when the Hebrew people still welcomed them and said, "Oh yeah, you're family to Joseph. Here, have something," right? They were, quite honestly, the cream of, I don't want to say cream of the crop. They were treated as royalty for a long time. But it wasn't until a couple of generations that they simply forgot. The Egyptians forgot who Joseph was. The Hebrew people forgot who they were. They were not seen anymore as royalty. They were seen more of as a nuisance. You know, the houses that they lived in would have been built as homes. You know, they weren't palaces by any stretch of the imagination, but they were for very influential people. Imagine, how do I want to say this? Imagine yourself living in these places. You have to work every day. You're all of a sudden considered a slave, but you hear stories from your past, how one of your ancestors saved Egypt from destruction. And now they're treating you this way. The Hebrew people didn't want to leave their homes. They didn't want to leave that lifestyle, but they wanted things to be like it was before, like what their grandparents and great-grandparents talked about. I don't know anybody like that, do you? Oh, I remember when gas was, pennies. I remember when a loaf of bread was a nickel. And, if you've ever sat around and listened to the old folks talk, doesn't matter what age you are, things always seemed better years ago, didn't it? These folks were no different. These folks had heard the stories. They understood what it used to be, and now they see where they are. It's kind of interesting that today a lot of folks are just like those Hebrew people. They know the lifestyle they're living isn't healthy, it isn't good for them, but they don't want to change. They don't want to go into the future. They long for the past. Sometimes they long for the past because, we were younger, we felt better, we had more energy. Sometimes they long for the past because it was a time before they got into the situation they're in now that they need to get out of. And I've said before, we can never go back. You only have the chance to move forward. And just like the mixed multitude that left Egypt, when we think about moving forward, or when we start to move forward, we grumble and we complain. But just like that mixed multitude that came out of Egypt, the Almighty has something better for us if we choose to be obedient to Him. If you're willing to hear His voice and do the things He's asking you to do, right? Just like the mixed multitude that came out, they had to sacrifice the lamb and put the blood on the door. We've got to choose to listen for His voice, and then we choose to either follow His instructions or reject Him. That's your choice. You can't meet in the middle here. He's the creator of the universe. He's going to have things His way. It's that simple. If He says cross the line, I suggest you cross the line. If He says stay on that side, you probably ought to think real hard about staying on that side. We have to make the choice. Now, here's the question. Are you ready to leave your own personal Egypt? Are you ready to walk out of something familiar that's bad for you, filled with plagues? What's worse than that? Think about it. Are you ready? Have you been crying out, and are you ready to go for that walk? Leave something familiar and go to a place that you think is filled with uncertainty. The Hebrew people, they didn't know what was in front of them. They knew what was behind them, but they had no idea what was in front of them. And following God is sort of like that. It may seem uncertain because we don't always know where he's leading us. But there's one thing I can be absolutely certain of. He knows where he's leading us. And where he is leading us is always going to be a better place than where we are right now. Why do we observe Passover? The short answer, and I haven't really seen this in any memes, but it should be a social media meme. The reason we observe Passover is to remember the past and look forward to a better future. That's it in a nutshell. It's that simple. It's that easy. That's what it's all about. Learning about a group of people who wanted to go back. Things were bad. They knew things were bad. But they wanted to go farther back. They wanted it to be like it was, when Joseph was the hero. But you can never go back. You can only go forward. Is it sometimes kind of scary? Ask anybody that's moved far away from home. Is it worthwhile? Ask anybody that's ever succeeded in anything they've ever done. Most people fail because they're afraid to succeed. The people who kept wanting to go back, they weren't afraid of God. They were afraid that they would have to do things differently. They weren't willing to change their lifestyle. They weren't willing to move forward. They kept looking backwards. By the way, for the Christians out there, there's another tale about that somewhere in Luke, I believe it is. If you've got your hand on the plow and you look back, you don't get to go. You just stay where you are. Are you ready to move forward? All it takes, well, I shouldn't say it that way, but it begins with a prayer. And then all it takes is putting one foot in front of the other. Sometimes every day. Sometimes several times a day. Is it difficult? Sometimes. Is it worthwhile? If the creator of the universe is leading you, yes, it is. Scary? Maybe. But how many, what is it, like 365 times in the Bible it says, fear not? I don't put a whole lot of stock in how many times it says something there like that, because a lot of people say, oh, one time for every day of the year. Maybe, maybe not. Don't get caught up in the numbers. Get caught up in the message. The real message, by the way. Fear not. Don't be afraid to remember the past, but also don't be afraid to follow the Almighty to the future. Did you have anything you wanted to add to all that?
Thank you for listening to us, and I hope you have a blessed week.
Amen. So, I probably should say the weather's getting warmer down here. We're having some things done as well, and if it happens that a time when we're supposed to be live, don't hold it against me for the next few weeks if you get a recorded podcast, because it will be a whole lot easier for us to record it and put it out than it will be to
have interruptions.
Have
and
interruptions,
noises and
yes.
all the things.
So just be aware of that. Oh my. And until Monday, many, many blessings.